Okay. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. In today's episode, I wanted to take a theological perspective and to respectfully speak about this idea of the creator and the creation. I'm going to talk about this idea a little bit and then bring out the notepad to open up the idea. The first title that arose to me, let me read it for the verse. At first I wanted to name this episode "The Creator's Intent Emanates Through Creation." But then I thought about our current modernity, and I thought about how the idea of the simulation hypothesis is going around, and how that's simultaneously an archaic revival of, you can say, the ancient mystical considerations that life was a dream. Right? Now, let me just bring out the notepad now. Pretty much the intent of the simulator is found in the simulation. And do simulations. Harbour, which is another way of saying carry. Harbour the emotional. Intent of their simulator. Now, the original contrast is pretty much, here I'll write it. The first noticeable duality is the duality between the creator and the creation. Now, this concept of a creator and creation, it can be seen through various contexts. You see, there is something very profound in regards to how the human mind accesses duality, and it's as if the original duality of life is how a self in a world appeared. Right? It's as if right now I am being an individual self because I am considering the separation of my physical existence with all of existence. In another way of saying, I am in a world, I am not the world because I'm walking on the world. There is, I would say, this is the duality, let's say, for this, but if we were to, let's say, observations on duality. So if we were to just wonder about duality, we have self, we have world, but we also have concept and we have context. If a person wants to get technical, and applicable duality to psychology would be in some sense the difference between, let's say, the esoteric and the exoteric. Exoteric being an implication of the surface, and esoteric being an implication of the essence. For example, the esoteric dimension to the human being is actually how the free will is moving, what is looking through our eyes, and what the mind is. The exoteric dimension of the human being is the surface. Also, when we look at this world, you can say the human being is being a self, and the human being finds itself in a world. Now, even though there's an initial consideration that like a person's physical body is separate from the physical world, but their mind is technically not separate from the physical world. For example, to a solipsist, the world would be their mind, or the context of their mind. So pretty much I'm trying to give the viewers a sense of, alright, there's a duality at work here in the implication of this question that is the title. So this is where I would say the concept and context are very important to recognize, because the concept of God can be applied just as an idea. I'm not talking about the religious view. Because in let's say through the respect of the Abrahamic traditions, God cannot be a concept. Any human being who believes in the concept of God technically is not believing in God, right? If you believe in the inconceivable, if you have faith, which is an experiential assurance of the inconceivable or certainty, that's different. But a person who in some sense says God is inconceivable, but I'm going to call it this name, there's not that mantras have no meaning, but there is for the let's say cultural psychosocial entity. you know? It's as if we are a creature in multiple dimensions. And so when we find an idea in one dimension, a concept, this concept could be applied to various contexts. I'll give you an example of this relationship I'm trying to convey here. I'll give you myself as an example. For me, I have this concept, all right, I'm a human being. But when it has come to me trying to comprehend the world, it has been on some level the concept accepts the context of the world and functions in it, or the concept doesn't accept the context of the world. And when the concept doesn't accept the context of the world, it feels it doesn't belong in the dimension. It's another way of saying any person who fails to accept their existential position will not have a comfortable experiential navigation here, right? I'm not saying a person should believe the first wave of sensory information they receive, but I am trying to say that this world is way more mysterious than our ideology can contain. There is a sort of mysterious experiential purpose to the mind, which the best way I can say it is that the world has a mind of its own, and when we step out of our, let's say, individual mind, we get to experience how the collective mind is present. So anyways, for example, I said I would use myself as an example. So just that I'm this concept, right? And what is the context? The angles of the context change. For example, if one day I wake up and I'm like, man, I don't deserve to exist, right? That's as if me rejecting myself out of access to the context of that concept in that moment. If I wake up one day and feel like, you know, I'm strong, and in some sense it's like the species is destined for the advanced civilization and nothing can, in some sense, barricade advancement. It's as if, you know, the enemies of the advance will be recycled for the advancement. Like, that's the poetic notion of it. And when I say enemies of advancement, I mean pretty much the idea, you can say it's pretty much like this, that life is a force, and this force has a potential, and when it goes about activating this potential, it comes to the limits of its perception. It comes to forces that counteract it, you know. That means, imagine a human being is late to get into this building, and then they run into the building and they keep pushing the door trying to open it, or they keep pulling the door trying to open it, and the door doesn't open, right? It's as if in that moment, for the intent of that life force, there was an obstacle, right? But when the person suddenly changes the context, instead of pulling the door, they're like, wait a minute, what if I push it? Suddenly the reality is accessible. And I feel what the case is that this world is so magnificently designed that limitations need to go somewhere, you know? And if you look at it from the theological perspective, it's kind of hilarious. Why? Because it's as if God created man not to suffer, but for God to see the potential of his own creation, if you choose to take a religious approach. You know, for me, I have my certainty is rooted in this experiential knowing that language cannot contain truth. It can point to it, though. You know, for example, when I see religious people and I see that they try to follow, let's say, the exact actions of a religious book, I'm like, okay, you know, but at the same time, I look at it and I'm like, imagine God had a cell phone and the prophets also had a cell phone. And imagine God sent a text message to the prophet, right? And the prophet shared this text message with other people, you know, if this message with other people. And so the idea is, do we follow the message, or do we wonder what the message is pointing to? Imagine I'll bring it out of, let's say, theological context for a moment and say that imagine, somebody messages someone, person A messages person B and says, hey, meet me at this location, right? And person B, imagine of reading the message, understanding it, and going to that location, going to that state of being. Imagine person B is like, no, I'm going to just worship this text message. I'm not going to follow the text message, right? You know what it is? It's as if, to me, religion is a mysterious interdimensional technology, and this mysterious interdimensional technology is as exoterically being devoid of its esoteric value. It's another way of saying that we have taken the text message more seriously than understanding why the message was given. You see, pretty much one can summarize, or at least to me this is a common denominator, that all ideological systems, in order to have people enter them, they must give a bit of freedom first. Do you know? People, for example, how would I say? Please keep in mind, this episode is not, intended to be religious. And let me tell you why. Because I don't think I'm a good example of, if somebody was to, let's say, with a robotic precision, follow the religious text, I would say there was a moment in my life where I realized that I am not an idea. I can be, but I am not. And that was a freedom. It was pretty much an ability for me to discriminate what is an experience and what is the effect of that experience. The concept of the creation can even be said to be a sort of, cause and effect. That means if you're not religious and you still have this idea, it's like, instead of a person creating you, it's like the creation can be just attributed to a cause. Really what is happening is that there is a real event happening here, a universal event, and that human beings are born through their ethnocentric kind of pathways, and they are pretty much all philosophers are tasked with trying to uncover the mysteries of the realm. Philosophy right now is one of the most, let me tell you, we're so blessed to have, philosophical departments, philosophy departments in universities. Let me tell you why. Even though it's like right now I feel the analytical philosophers emasculated the continental philosophers into silence. But philosophy is the closest thing we have to being able to update a system without getting defined by it. If most ideological systems are trying to find an answer, for example, when I listen to theists and atheists debate on YouTube, they're fighting over the answer, right? But nobody is fascinated with what sort of questions, does reality bring? Philosophy is one of the oldest, one of the most, I would say, ancient traditions where its purpose is to find great questions. That means if scientists are trying to find great answers, the purpose of philosophers is to find great questions. Questions usually open worlds, they branch out worlds, and answers close them. That means if I just gave a single answer to this, to simulations, Harbour, the emotional intent of your simulator, I could just be like, yes, there we go, we have an answer, end of talk. The whole talk could be just me being like, yes, and end of talk, the shortest live stream. So I am saying there is fascination and beauty in questions as much as there are answers. And honesty means that you recognize that it's an unknown event. This is really what it is. It's an unknown event. It's more multidimensional than language can describe. and a species has language to use. Pretty much we could move as bodies and we could move as minds, but how do you move as a mind? Your attention to inner landscapes shift. So what I'm trying to say is that the concept can change, the context can change. So we have the relationship of the simulator and we have the simulation. Now, there is a contrast. There is something I need to say, that we have, let's say, entered that very historic phase, that unique phase in the evolution of whatever is happening on Earth, where we have reached a point where if a person is materialist, it's another way of saying the simulation creates simulator. This is so far our physical understanding. Without a body, it's like, who can have a mind? Do you know? Who can access reality? So it's like embodiment is crucial. And the term consciousness, in contrast to the term awareness, is that consciousness is conditional to something. That means usually people are conscious of or as or through something. An immaterialist would be, in some sense, the simulator creates the simulation. Pretty much due to just this cosmological position, and pretty much the planet having, I call it the on-off effect of, let's say, psychology. And what do I mean by this? I mean that the evolution of the mind of the human being, or even the initial cells on this planet, their motivation came from the presence of light. When there was light, there was engageable energy. When there is no light, it's as if we are in some sense thrown into, let's say, a sort of fear mindset. Right, even in morality, modern morality, it's as if like, heaven is depicted, or good is depicted as light, and evil is depicted as darkness. There's an evolutionary cosmological relationship here before the concepts even. But I'm saying the concepts reflect the cosmological position. Now, so I'm trying to say, okay. The idea is, do simulations harbor the emotional intent of their simulator? It's another way of saying we find ourselves in a worldly event where there's cause and effect at work, and pretty much the human being has an option to considering itself as the cause of reality, or it has an option to consider itself as the effect. When it comes to the outer realms, because we don't create ourselves, every person is born out of others. So it's another way of saying that in regards to man's physical life, we are not in the causal position. But when it comes to the human being's psychological life, that means it's as if it's like, sure, the body, we didn't create the body, but when a human being sits down and tries to solve a problem, it's like that attention there is like it's like the mind is acting like the cause of a universe. It can shift with the mere whim of its attention. guess I should try explaining this through more like through views. So let's say there's a view. Did God, this is, let's say, the theological view. Did God create the world through an emotional intent? So it would be another way of saying when Adam and Eve in the religious narrative, let's say, were cast away from paradise upon, let's say, tasting the forbidden, which is, in religion, it would be a sort of impurity. That means it was as if like God's will was bypassed by, let's say, an angel, and that instantaneity of will was a suggestion as if God is not a proper creator. You know what it is? It's kind of like, to me, if God was an inventor, it's like an inventor that invented something. It didn't work properly, so the inventor is trying to perfect the invention. And so it's as if the invention, it's like more experiments are being conducted. I always wondered that in religious books, they say God is all forgiving, all merciful. These are beautiful words ascribed to an inconceivable source. However, I asked myself from a theological perspective, why didn't God forgive Adam and Eve in heaven? Why is it that when Adam and Eve have come on earth, they can be forgiven, but when they were in heaven, they couldn't be forgiven? And I realized in order for the inventor to perfect its invention, it was in some sense tested. That means, from a religious perspective, if God, we took it through, let's say, an archetypal, humanized, conceptual perspective, that means, let's say, an inconceivable being, or like an invisible person created the visible world or something. I'm just trying to humanize it so we can talk about it. So it's as if, even going to the title again, it would be as if, from the theological view, what emotion did God have when he created mankind? And it would be this strange thing where it's, imagine like Adam and Eve being in heaven again, and they make a mistake. God comes and sees their mistake, and God, let's say, exiles them from paradise. So what does that mean? The reaction of the creator to the creation was an emotional response. That means, from a religious perspective, it's like the world has been created for an emotional reason, not for, let's say, an analytical reason. That means technically it's not for a visible reason. And emotions, they are you could say, the, let's say, momentum behind our eyes. The momentum of how the free will moves. And somebody could say, Mr.Within, the concept of emotions didn't exist in paradise, and I'd be like, you see, it does for human beings though. In certain monotheistic traditions, if a person goes and asks and says, what is the soul? The answer will come that the soul is the mystery of God. It's one of the secrets of God. That means it's beyond, let's say, the human capacity to engage. Now, one clue we do have about the soul is that when in the Abrahamic creation story, God imbued man with life from his own breath. Pretty much it's like you build something out of clay and you put your own life force in it. You know, you blow it's as if like a collective being gave its individual self, its collective self. And so, to me, the mind is another way of the soul's ability to be a sort of creator, right? And you know, regardless of if a person thinks through a religious perspective or secular perspective, we cannot ignore a cause and effect. Like, you know, it's like human beings, let's say, you know, in bookstores, like the self-help section is like the biggest, you know, it's like this huge industry, right? And it's as if, why do people want to help themselves to unleash their creative ability so the problems of their life, its context changes? Pretty much, I would say the true, or I would say mysticism's, let's say true aim is like the fascination of wondering, you know, if truth was not a concept and it was not a context, if truth was irrelevant or independent, it would be another way of saying there's a dimension to life where things are just being, and there's a dimension to life where things are being done. There's a doer, there's someone's doing it. It's pretty much like verb, noun. The noun is the being, the verb, we can ascribe the word doing, right? So it's as if in any moment when somebody does anything, they are simultaneously being. If truth is found in the context, the person's like, before I need to get enlightened, you know, in this world, the world was enlightened. Imagine the world was enlightened and all creatures in it were enlightened. Imagine the enlightenment of a planetary entity, or the enlightenment of a cosmic entity. From the secular view, do the emotions of the human being, of the human, I'm pretty much trying to say the example of like here. Can the emotional intent of an inventor be noticed in the invention? It would be another way of saying, like, right now I'm this person giving this podcast. So if for example I listen to this podcast, like, I don't know, let's say a week from now, it's as if I am wondering, okay, is how much can I notice my own emotional intent, you know, prior to, let's say, my voice releasing ideas. And I would say that emotional intent for me is just like, I am every day I wake up, I'm like, okay, where is the world happening and where am I happening and what is the difference? You know, there's days I've woken up and I felt like just an idea and just like a physical body, and I'm like, man, it's gonna end. everything's gonna end. Like every person who's, let's say, experiencing a spectrum or a roller coaster of emotions, of joy, suffering, pain, pleasure, it's as if they will end, right? It's as if a moment will come when we are not conditional anymore. The person has to become reacquainted with the potentially unconditional and potentially unknown. In Tibetan Buddhism, they take it so intensely that they have this in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this legend, kind of like legendary book, this holy book left by Guru Padmasambhava. And this dude hid this book and prophesied that someone would find it, when human beings were ready to read it. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, they acknowledge pretty much the world between this world, let's say, and how would I say, they identify pretty much a dimension after death where they call Bardo, and they have this view that after death, the soul is poetically like standing, mystically speaking, is standing right beside the body and is like a lost soul. So for 40 days, these Tibetan Buddhist monks, they sit beside, let's say, sit in the cremation zone of, let's say, the funeral, and they just pretty much pray, and they keep telling where the soul to go. And it's like the initial advice is like, follow the Dharma. That means there is a power in, I would say, dishonesty, and there's a power in honesty. But the power in dishonesty is like a backfiring into confusion. But I would say how would I say it? It's as if, like, in the most honest view, there is no good or bad. There is nothing needing to be anything. Honesty means that you trust your being before you need to do anything. I think that's an appropriate definition. Something I have personally used, there's moments in my life where, I enter a sort of depth, and then it's very important what ideas come to my mind. Because I've had moments where I have, just like how I tried to see 3,600 years into the future in regards to how an advanced civilization or potential strategy for it can be implemented, there's been moments where I have wondered pretty much of like hell. My mind has wondered about the dimensions of the lesser worlds. And the only thing I would say that has purified me from what I would say any sort of possession on some deep natural level is I realized if the knowledge is temporary, the only thing that one can eternally trust is the unknown. That means if the human psychology somehow manages to find contentment with how the unknown variables in life influence it as much as the known, we do not get trapped in the empty room of the intellect. It's as if infinity was gifted to mankind, but the gift was not hidden in the brain, it was hidden in the heart. The brain is acting like a simulator. It's hilarious. It's like first the world simulated the brain, then the brain re-simulated the world, and then consciousness was like, did I simulate all of this? And so eventually it reaches a point where the person sees that because the species doesn't have the capability to analytically understand the meaning of life, is left with taking a playful approach. I am telling you, it's like we should call this the playful principle. That means it's like, certainty, there's a good and bad to it, buddy. When I was younger, I wanted to be an inventor, and there's still time, but I had this very huge fascination. It's as if, like, I remember when I was very young, I have a twin brother, and he would choose the warrior like fantasy characters. I would choose the mage. Right? Why? Because I felt there was an incredible fascination with someone being, for example, able to raise their hand and imagine a giant hand steps out of the ocean, extends out of the ocean made of water. That would be a sort of like the mind does not just have an ability to move its body, it has an ability to move the world. That means the world has become the greater body. And so this urge towards invention was another way of, I would say, my young ego trying to see if it can control beyond the body. And you know what it is? It's kind of like, sometimes I feel it's like a hilarious, like, tag team kind of wrestling thing, right? Where the Earth was like, all right, I'm going to move intelligence for some time, and the Earth was like, all right, now you're it, and a human being was born. And I feel sometimes that, okay, this is something I do often, where I just think like, okay, what if everything I know is wrong? What if, not wrong, but what if everything I know is not what is important to be known? I have this view often. I would say a sort of insecurity of my universal vision that makes me constantly wonder about the dimensions of the universe. On some level, I'm just this person, and I don't know where I am. I know I'm on Earth, I know I'm in a nation, I know all the cultural language, all the different languages used to explain the human position. But I on some deep level, the unknown viewer within my eyes doesn't know why it's an unknown world. Or doesn't know why it's being an unknown viewer of a known world. And this is why I'm saying that I found a contentment with the unknown. And so it's as if, like, I realized on some level, it's like that urge for invention, it translated into concepts. I'm not, like, on some level, I view myself as a conceptual inventor. I think I've invented a bunch of new concepts in these times. But who knows, The cool thing about the world is that we can't control it, but we can control the part of it that we're doing. Why is the human mind here? To provide variations to reality in an abstract way, and then use those abstractions to update reality. On some level, how can we even as beings say we are in a world when the world is changing? That means, how can a changing universe be defined? How can a changing worldly event be defined? Right now, as I'm giving this talk, it's as if I'm telling the viewers there's an inner realm, and everybody has their inner realms, and that's where imagination happens. That means anybody who wants to use imagination, I'm telling you, I call it Mr.Within's inner and outer realmism. in my inner realms, I see things move. And then it becomes very easy to, let's say, vocalize an image. Honestly, in these talks, it's like I'm seeing a film in my mind, and I'm just talking about it. The simulator is another way of saying it's an independent causal force. You know, it's like the poetic question, who were we before the human idea existed? Or it would be this view on like the mind, and the person's like, okay, my mind generated concepts for my body, you know, but how can my mind be a concept? How can something that is creating concepts be its creation? That means if the inventor is, let's say, like somebody holding a remote control, and let's say the invention is a remote control car, and if we also opened up the theological perspective here, it would be as if like, is God remote control? Is God controlling or is the simulator kind of, you know, in a different place and kind of controlling the simulation? It's another way of saying some part of the vast inconceivable idea of God is, you know what it is? It's as if like God is looking through our eyes, and our eyes are a little sight of God. You know, it's like the mind is kind of, I would say the mind is not like, it's not like the mind is heaven, but the mind has a, you know, the mind can access a little bit of heaven. What is moving here? And every act of movement is like the brain simulating. We have this view that the brain gives off waves. And it's as if consciousness is like a stable, you know, brain frame rate. Right now, I'm even feeling pretty blissed out by just noticing, like, wow, consciousness is accessing sight, is accessing, it's as if there is, like, think of, like, the philosophical idea of non-existence. And now think about the philosophical idea that there is something looking at something when before there was nothing to look at anything. You know, if God was an artist, it would be like the human being was the masterpiece. Or like humanity is the magnum opus of the divine. So guys, a question has come in the chat section. I'm going to just pause the notepad for a while and talk a bit. So a question has come in the chat section. How do you see things move in your inner realms? So If I was to polish your question to be able to share more about it, I would say, what do we find in the inner realms? That means imagine you're a human being stranded on an island and you have one lifetime just for a little while to figure it all out. So what I'm trying to say is first have a true fascination for the mysteries of the mind. Because if a person cannot accept the unknown, cannot even consider the unknown, they cannot use their mind. They cannot use, let's say, deeper dimensions of their mind. So how I see it is just like how right now I'm seeing a bottle on the table, this bottle of ethos water. You know, guys, even the water I drink is philosophical. The brand is ethos, which is the emotional inspiration of a collective. That's, I think, the true meaning of that word, ethos. I see it just like I see this water bottle in front of me. It's an instantaneous knowing that I am seeing the water bottle. Now, I can close my eyes and still see that water bottle, and that's my checkpoint to becoming conscious of my inner realms. So it's literally like an act of concentration. They call it single-pointedness of mind. If you can have a single-pointedness of being an unknown viewer in the moment before the views define you, that means it's another way of saying a being who is free from their mind, they can use their mind without the mind defining them. Pretty much you gotta be able to be an attributeless viewer of them as the whole moment. And the moment you are, the idea is not like you're trying to, find your inner realms. The idea is you're trying to see what this whole moment is, and the inner realms is a part of the moment. So just like how I can raise my hand in the air, these words are arising with a similar effort. So it's as if the effort has expression in a subjective dimension. And to me, I'll tell you, the way I see, at least when I speak and my eyes are open, I see it in front of me like 2 meters of a distance in my inner realms. That means imagine there was an invisible room overlaid on this visible room where I'm existing in. And it's as if my experience of my imagination is like, okay, in that invisible room, again, I feel like a distance of 2 meters from where my eyes are, like in front of me. That's where things are happening. But at the same time, it depends on memory. So when a person remembers something, they don't just remember their self. They remember the world that they were being a self in simultaneously. It's accompanied. And so what I mean is that it depends on what I'm seeing in my inner realms. If it's a memory, I'm most likely looking at it in accordance to how I was in that memory. But right now, as I'm speaking to you, it's like before I even, put this, let's say minuscule effort for my voice to emerge, it's like I'm seeing my inner realms. And I can choose to, you know what it is? It's literally like, if there was a building with 2 floors and, similar design of apartments, okay, at least let's say we have 2 floors to a building, it's as if when we pay attention through the body, we are in the floor under first floor, okay? But imagine there's a party in the 2nd floor and you could hear music and stomps and all of this from above. So that's kind of like the mind. The mind is taking place in a room, which, because that room is overlaid upon reality, it can also be seen in reality. That means I can visualize like let's say this bottle of water, I could visualize, let's say, a glowing blue sphere, okay? And where I'm visualizing that, it's in front of me. It doesn't start from where my eyes are. It's like the unique thing about intelligence is that it's noticing itself. Whereas how some scholars have said the awareness of awareness. So when you are aware, you're being aware, you instantaneously notice all the content in your awareness. So knowledge doesn't become something where you're pursuing like a pre-created structure. It just becomes how much energy has a willingness to see. How the moment is being. So it's like the best way I have found to be able to, even when it comes to reflexes, right? I would say I've had some next level reflexes, and coordination, right? There came a time where I was a PA on a film set, feeling like, it's like anybody who's a PA understands like how, those who built the pyramid feel in Egypt. That means it's not a noble position. Pretty much robots will be PAs in the future in the film industry. But anyways, I was a PA on set and they needed leaves, dry leaves for a scene on, what do you call it? Like on the top of this building. Right? Like this one floor building. Right? And there were people, cameramen upstairs, and they're like, throw leaves. And I remember I got the leaves. I gave it to someone. That person tried throwing it. It failed. And then the leaves fell from it. And then when the bag came down, I just in an instant grabbed with one hand, like a really good amount of leaves, put it in the bag, kind of like, tightened the top of the bag. And then the way I threw the bag was so exactly aligned that it literally came in front of the hand of the person catching it, And, I felt like an archer in that moment, Sometimes in these talks, when I feel like I've said a sentence that, with some accuracy, it portrays my inner realms, I feel like, it's like I'm not bad at archery, in the inner realms. So that's the answer. I hope that was okay enough answer. To be honest, really, I have this view that nobody can teach you how to look at something. Dear viewers, please comment in the chat section in a way where you're conscious that it's being shown on the screen of the video. I don't know. I have wondered about, okay, what is moving me as an object? And I'm like, all right, it's a subject. Alan Watts, the great Alan Watts, he says, that really what the ego is the immediate thought of self you have in the moment. Carl Jung even calls it the persona, and the idea is that the persona is a mass. Pretty much the idea for this episode is really, I'm saying, okay, if we were created, could there be an intent behind it? And let's say human beings from, again, the theological view were created, right? And as human beings were created, I'm kind of wondering, is the soul the intention of God within the, let's say, moving body? You know, a person can have this view that life is a school or a prison, or they could have this view that life is like a party where everybody, every, let's say, conscious entity has been invited to, and it's as if we're all waiting for the host. The host hasn't appeared, and then people are like, yo, is there even a host? There is no host to this party. You know, whose party is this? Does the party owner even exist? And imagine the party owner is like in another room, upstairs, let's say. It would be like as if the whole party or the whole gathering is waiting for the host. And I kind of wonder, I'm like, okay, what is the 4.5 billion year old potential of the human species waiting for? What is it? Let's say, regardless of what dimensions we have, let's say you think you're just a body, you think there's a mind, there's a soul, right? It's as if it's like, what is everything waiting for? And I realize it's waiting for movement that is unfamiliar. We are living in a society where the strange, due to its unfamiliar nature, is condemned. That means, like, just like back in the day, you know, in the times of the crucible, like, you know, they had this thing where they were like, you know, if a witch is like, you know, like if you throw a witch in the water and the witch comes back up, you know, it's a witch, and if it drowns, like it drowns. Something bizarre in that way, you know. We are due to our fear of the unfamiliar, changing our own familiarity, we fight it, we shun it, we condemn it, you know. But in reality, novelty is the fascination of the realm. It's another way of saying, it's like, you know, it's hilarious. It's like, on some level, I know what everybody wants, but I also don't know what everybody wants. To take my attention back to this episode, simulations, let's take it as if the idea of the world. Harbour the emotional intent of their simulator, and let's take this as the idea of self. This is interchangeable, but I'm like, okay, let's look at it from this angle. does the world carry like I'm trying to think, okay, let's say we have an artist. This artist creates an artwork. People come and tell the people look at the artwork and they're like, man, what did this artist try to draw? Like, what was the purpose behind the artist's drawing, right? And an emotional intent is not necessarily a reasonable intent, like a logical intent. So it's as if when we look at the artwork, we're like, it's like the emotions of the artist led to the perceptions that were actualized on the empty canvas. It's as if it would be a way of saying feeling the life of the world is superior to limited containment through analysis. So in other words, feeling the life of the world, if the intent of the universe was an emotional one, then let's say the intelligent intent, inconceivable intent for the world, or how the inconceivable intended conception. It's as if like, is how we feel more important than how we think? And if it is more important, it would be like, let's say we have emotions and we have the intellect, and then let's say we have the biology. But okay, let me just go with emotions and intellect. So and imagine we have cause and we have effect. And so it's as if in one position we have the world, in another position we have the self, then we have the self, and then we have the world. And similarly for the intellect, there's a causal relationship with the world. Or let me say it this way, it could be this, that for the human species to truly find freedom beyond its emotions is to understand that they are the cause of it. It's as if on some level, if we're not responsible for how we feel about what we see, then it's like we can't accept what we see. This is what it seems to be. The intellect, we're like, yeah, the body came from the world, and it's the effect of the intellect is pretty much like the function of the self. And so when we come to emotions, if we consider that the free will started it, you know, imagine, you know, a soul became emotional, was fighting emotions, and God was like, you know, stop fighting, and the soul was like, the emotion started it. The soul was like, the emotion started. So and really our emotions are based on how much the free will finds itself in control, right? Like what is like the heartbreak of the love that we see in movies, right? The person didn't have control over what happened. And you know, it's like unless the species finds a way to see beyond just the outcome of a specific dimension of control, it's like, you know, relationships are as, you know, short-lived as the patience there is there. It's like poetically, if there's a body, mind, soul, it's like the love of body is conditional, the love of mind could also be conditional, but the love of soul is inconceivable. That means imagine like loving the inconceivable potential of how existence can be experienced. You see, you know, I noticed this in many places, that the human mind, when its intellect loosens up, it does tap into an emotional rhythm, and that emotional rhythm gives its own authorization of manifestation. This idea of glossolalia is another way of saying the brain has the intelligence of the moment has gone into a sort of, it's as if the world is moving yourself rather than the self moving the world. And if the world is moving yourself, if you stay as the idea of self, you'll be pushed around or pulled by what the world does. But if you realize that the mind is not an object and it's like the source of this viewing of life, pretty much just like people are listening to this talk, it's as if you're not my words. So similarly, when a person realizes they are not their ideas, it's as if from a primordial context of freedom, you know, there comes the ability to live in a changing world, there comes the contentment to live in a changing world, and that becomes like sort of enlightenment. Because the idea is, for how long do we want to be, you know, overwhelmed by life? Life is honestly an overwhelming event. And I'm pretty sure people who get older, they feel this. They feel like, okay, it's intensifying, where is it all going? Why was I here? What am I gonna do? What am I gonna be? Like all of these, you know, questions, they come because the human being is getting closer to acknowledging, and in some sense, acknowledging the unknown. That means before the fear of death can be released, it's as if the fear of the unknown must be released. Those who don't fear the unknown, I will tell you, it's as if they are advanced beings on earth. And visions usually have their own pull, you know. There's something in evolution where consciousness is constantly pulling itself out of the past to readjust in the future. There is a reason, you know, businessmen, tighten their ties. And if the brain is a simulation, the mystery of consciousness may take us to this point. It's like strange, you know, it's like consciousness is trying to prove to itself that it's something, but it's viewing the objects and the viewer is not the object. That means right now I'm looking at this bottle of water and I'm not this bottle of water. You know, but if I started to think I'm this bottle of water, let's say the wind pushes the bottle of water and I'm like, oh my God, I'm being pushed by calm. It's identification, because what we are suggests what happens to what. I'm going to see if I could find a quote tunnel. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj, this enlightened, considered yogi. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj, this guy is very liberated. I mean, his mind has released itself from itself in a spectacular way. Anyways, I'll continue the quotes. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj, it is always the false that makes you suffer, the false desires and fears, the false values and ideas, the false relationships between people. Abandon the false and you're free of pain. Truth makes happy, truth liberates. And abandoning the false is another way of saying it's easier to be honest than dishonest, because dishonesty takes energy. Or as, I don't know, who was it, Aristotle, where he's like a dishonest person has to remember various like versions of itself, various simulations of itself. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, wisdom is knowing I am nothing, love is knowing I am everything, and in between my life moves. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj says you will receive everything you need when you stop asking for what you do not need. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj says once you realize that the road is the goal and that you're always on the road, not to reach a goal but to enjoy its beauty and its wisdom, life ceases to be a task and becomes natural and simple in itself in ecstasy. So this is another way of saying, at least in my, from Mr.Within perspective, it would be like an advanced civilization. To be truly advanced must be fully beautiful. That means beautiful in all dimensions. That means it's like, you know, if the destiny of the species is not beautiful, it's as if we missed out on how it could be. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, your expectation of something unique and dramatic, of some wonderful explosion, is merely hindering and delaying your self-realization. You're not to expect an explosion, for the explosion has already happened at the moment when you were born, when you realized yourself as being knowing feeling. There's only one mistake you're making. You take the inner for the outer and the outer for the inner. What is in you, you take to be outside you, and what is outside you take to be in you. The mind and feelings are external, but you take them to be intimate. You believe the world to be objective while it is entirely a projection of your psyche. That is the basic confusion, and no new explosion will set it right. You have to think yourself out of it. There is no other way. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, a quiet mind is all you need. All else will happen rightly once your mind is quiet. As the sun on rising makes the world active, so does self-awareness affect changes in the mind. In the light of calm and steady self-awareness, inner energies wake up and work miracles without any effort on your part. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj says all you want is to be happy. All your desires, whatever they may be, are longing for happiness. Basically, you wish yourself well. Desire by itself is not wrong. It is life itself, the urge to grow in knowledge and experience. It is choices you make that are wrong. To imagine that some little thing, dash, food, sex, power, fame, dash, will make you happy is to deceive oneself. Only something as vast and deep as your real self can make you truly and lastingly happy. And I would say, guys, food, sex, power, fame, see, if a person was happy and then they attained that stuff, there would be nothing wrong with it. But because that stuff, they're not, it's like there is no happiness in the attainment. That's why it's like, you know what it is? It's like, does it really matter if a person drinks like a glass of water or they drink a glass of expensive juice, or let's say, they eat the world's most complex bubble tea. They drink the world's most complex bubble tea, a bubble tea with like, let's say 2,000 flavors or something. A bubble tea that it's like there's, human beings, let's say have gone mad experiencing all those tastes at once. I think what happiness is it's a quality of how we're being, more than it's something that specifically needs to be done. If it's an outer desire that will conclude happiness, then it's something that needs to be done, right? But it's pretty much a way of saying, like, you're here once in this world. Why not appreciate its incredible nature? It's like the world is wonderful and full of wonder, the person's like, how can I suffer in a world filled with wonder and mysteries? There was a time where I was really upset, and then my mind was like, okay, the human species doesn't even know what really intelligence is, so who is upset? And then I realized I was upset at something that I didn't know. It's as if something's upset, but it's like that thing that's upset is not a thing. So then the person's like, okay, have my emotions been hovering in my moment, and my thoughts been hovering in my moment, and I've just like in let's say original intent of free will identified, I feel like if life was a video game, I got to see, the physical. It's like I completed the physical level, the visible dimension, and then there's like an invisible dimension. So it's like, okay, I experienced living as a body, and then I experienced living as a mind, and then it's as if once the visible dimension you've leveled up, completed, and then the invisible level you've leveled up, completed, eventually the person reaches the inconceivable. And what is more inconceivable than let's say invisible subjects is emotions that move those subjects. Emotions are like pure signals from the original era. So it's important to start with the context of happiness. It's like be in a happy world before needing to be happy or not. It's as if be in a great world. Why not? It's like a free-for-all of like the neutrality of perception to choose. We can choose to consider that we are a species that is like, we can identify with the misery of the species, or we can in some sense identify, with the advanced joy. Just like, let's say somebody is like practicing dribbling with a soccer ball. They know that, okay, there's other greater soccer players in the world who could dribble better than me. So similarly, it's like a species that is convinced by the misery of its past and suddenly realize, wait a minute, is there a better way the whole civilization can be orchestrated in regards to a love for its future? To me, I think one of the advanced civilization will become a leading idea in global culture when human beings realize it is possible to love the future. It is. That means imagine there was this really enlightened yogi and they're like, Yogi, how are you so enlightened? And the enlightened yogi is like, buddy, I'm so enlightened. I'm so enlightened that right now I am loving my future selves that have not been born yet. Right? So it's as if the eyes of God were found in a soul, and that soul recommended all possible lifetimes to, in some sense, only be capable of arising if they are the ultimately advanced. You know, I'm telling you, the intellect, its touch of infinity is its ability, its attempt to touch infinity is advancement. But when it comes to the heart has to do with, like, the same time that we have a relationship with something that's moving, we are actually having a relationship with the silence and stillness. I truly find somebody who becomes a great orator has a strange amount of comfort with silence. To me, this was something that really helped me, in the sense that I was like, okay, if I can be comfortable with silence and stillness, it's another way of saying I can be comfortable when the simulations of movement and noise end. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, do not try to understand. It's enough if you do not misunderstand. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, the mind creates the abyss, the heart crosses it. It's another way of saying, like, the physical dimension is here for the mental dimension to, in some sense, go beyond it. I think it was the Buddha who had an idea where he said the Dharma is like a raft that takes you across the oceans of samsara. That means conscious appreciation of the origin and considerable origin of consciousness. It kind of leads the person to not behaving. You know what it is? We are reaching that point where, due to our multidimensional exploration of the nature of the human being, it's like the world that our mind creates. It's like the unknown viewer, or it's another way of saying a body realizes it's a mind, and a mind realizes it's a mind, poetically, for the unknown viewer, the soul. Right? So it's as if the person's like, who is my body serving? You know, and the answer comes, the mind. The mind is like the commanding officer, if the body is seen as the metaphor of a soldier. Now imagine the commanding officer is like, who am I serving? And the answer, you know, comes that, or let's say we shout, who is the commanding officer? What is the mind serving? And this is where the mind is serving the unknown. Just like there's a view that, like, there's this guy named Amin using the online alias Mr.Within. It's like there can be also this view that there's an unknown viewer that has been moving in the known, but it has been moving as the unknown. So it's another way of saying the conscious life of the mind is how the invisible is moving through the known. It's like the visible is encapsulated by the invisible, and the invisible is encapsulated by the inconceivable. The concept of the visible and invisible still, they find citizenship in duality, but the inconceivable belongs to nowhere. You know, it's like an inconceivable being is another way of saying what is viewing conception. And it's technically a higher dimension. And our species shouldn't fear the possibility of more worlds in our world, you know, or more worlds to our world. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, the consciousness in you and the consciousness in me, apparently two, really one, seek unity, and that is love. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, love is not selective, desire is selective. In love there are no strangers. When the center of selfishness is no longer, all desires for pleasure and fear of pain cease. one is no longer interested in being happy. Beyond happiness, there is pure intensity, inexhaustible energy, the ecstasy of giving from a perennial source. Questioner, you seem to advise me to be self-centered to the point of egoism. Must I not yield even to my interest in other people? Shirin Sagada Maharaj says, your interest in others is egoistic, self-concerned, self-oriented. You're not interested in others as persons, but only as far as they enrich or ennoble your own image of yourself. And the ultimate in selfishness is to care only for the protection, preservation and multiplication of one's own body. By body, I mean all that is related to your name and shape, your family, tribe, country, race, etc. To be attached to one's name and shape is selfishness. A man who knows that he's neither body nor mind cannot be selfish, for he has nothing to be selfish for. Or you may say he's equally selfish on behalf of everybody he meets. Everybody's welfare is his own. The feeling, in quotations, I am the world is myself, becomes quite natural. Once it is established, there is just no way of being selfish. To be selfish means to covet, to acquire, to accumulate on behalf of the part against the whole. That means it's another way Srila Sagrada Maharaj is saying, like, the world, the universe is like living in here, and it's like we don't realize it's living here. So our identification, even with a little part of it, is the ignorance of the whole thing happening. That means it's as if we are not earthlings. We are universalings. Universelings. I don't know how to say it. You know, maybe somebody named Link can help me out there. I think, guys, I you know, indirectly created the concept of universalings. You know, imagine an extraterrestrial species comes on Earth and it's like, if we don't like you, we're gonna invade you. And we're like, buddy, we're from the same universe. Yeah, we're from a planet in the middle of the void. You guys are from some planet from the middle of the void. You know, it's like we got so much in common. You know, you don't need to invade us. And the extraterrestrials like, all right, you know, we're technically family. That would be like, you know, an egotistical, you know, simulated bond saves the species from alien invasion. Can you imagine? You know, I think I'm gonna add this, you know, write this story. Here, I'll take ownership of it, but I'll say like, oh man, imagine like an alien species comes down to Earth, right? And, you know, comes down to Earth and they want to invade Earth, and there's just a young kid, you know, and the aliens come to the young kid and they're like, we're gonna invade your species, you know. And the young kid is like, please don't invade my species. I was gonna go to like a birthday party or something, right? And then the aliens, imagine, are like, okay, you know, it's like this human being politely asked us not to invade the species, you know, it's like, sure. And can you imagine alien invasion was avoided because we said, can you not? You know, one of the blessings of the human mind is its playfulness with the unknown. Really, what divinity is how the unknown moves the known. Do simulations harbor the emotional intent of their simulator? It's another way of saying, okay, we didn't create the world created us, but we are creating our understanding and experience of the world. The brain is simulating its comprehension upon the world. And because it's doing that, technically we are the simulator of the meaning we see in stuff. That means we didn't create the world, but we are creating what the world means. On a psychological level, I'm speaking about that. It's like the mind's trying to be something. It's like the human mind's trying to be something in the void. You know, it's like, what's up with that? You know? Let's see if there's more quotes. Okay, there's tons of more quotes. I'll read a few more. Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, as you watch your mind, you discover yourself as the watcher. When you stand motionless, only watching, you discover yourself as the light behind the watcher. The source of light is dark. Unknown is the source of knowledge. That source alone is. Go back to that source and abide there, which is another way of saying, as a known entity in a temporary world, what is there to fear about our unknown life? The soul is our unknown life, the body is our known life, and the mind is poetically, the bridge in between. Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says there's no such thing as a person. There are only restrictions and limitations. The sum total of these defines the person. You think you know yourself when you know what you are, but you never know who you are. The person merely appears to be. Like the space within the pot appears to have the shape and volume and smell of the pot. See that you are not what you believe yourself to be. Fight with all the strength at your disposal against the idea that you are nameable and describable. You are not. Refuse to think of yourself in terms of this or that. There is no other way out of misery, which you have created for yourself through blind acceptance without investigation. Suffering is a call for inquiry. All pain needs investigation. Don't be too lazy to think. It's another way of saying knowledge is in the unknown, so we cannot avoid the unknown. Might as well. The species have a conscious global effort to understand it. It's like no longer we're living at a time where it's like, what does one person deserve? It's like, what does the species deserve? If you're religious, does the species deserve to go to hell or heaven? And in some sense, isn't the soul poetically how God builds paradise on earth? In order to enter paradise, it's as if the idea must be real, but the only thing that is real in human life is the earth, right, from a theological view. So what I'm trying to say is that the most imagined God created an invention, and the most advanced expression of this invention is the joy of God. Do you know? That means it's as if God created mankind to see not mankind's weakness, but a mankind's strength, strength to return to the ultimate. This is the challenge of, I would say, from at least the theological lens of how experience is existing and why it's even here. Like, that should be a fearless question. I guess that's one moment where I truly felt like a conqueror. When I felt nobody knows, I don't know, the world doesn't even know, then what about the unknown? As if at the edge of knowledge, the unknown is left to realize. It's just I'm trying to see how we can research something that is on one dimension physically being an effect of an unknown cause, and at the same time it is being it's like an unknown world caused the effect of a known self, and now it's like an unknown self causing a known world. It's as if the body and the mind are experiencing each other through each other, and I feel maybe this is the true representation of the yin-yang symbol. The yang was the outer realms, the yin was the inner realms, and there's a bit of the inner realms and the outer realms, and a bit of the outer realms and the inner realms. The yin-yang is literally explaining imagination. The yin-yang symbol. If there's people named, yin or yang, it's like round of applause for your name. One final quote from Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. I'll read 2 quotes. He says, truth is not a reward. I'll read 3 quotes, guys. These 3 quotes are actually pretty good. Okay, truth is not a reward for good behavior, nor a prize for passing some tests. It cannot be brought about. It is the primary, the unborn, the ancient source of all that is. You are eligible because you are. You need not merit truth. It is your own. Stand still. Be quiet. Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says there are always moments when one feels empty and estranged. Such moments are most desirable, for it means the soul has cast its moorings and is sailing for distant places. This is detachment, when the old is over and the new has not yet come. If you are afraid, the state may be distressing, but there's really nothing to be afraid of. Remember the instruction. Whatever you come across, go beyond. That's it. Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj also says, all you need is already within you. Only you must approach yourself with reverence and love. Self-condemnation and self-disgust are grievous errors. Your constant flight from pain and search for pleasure is a sign of love you bear for yourself. All I plead with you is this: make love of yourself perfect. Deny yourself nothing, give yourself infinity and eternity, and discover that you do not need them. You are beyond. You are beyond. It's like another way where he's saying you are beyond anything you can find here. And I'll read one final statement. Man, these quotes are so next level, I can't stop reading. Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, save all your energies and time for breaking the wall your mind has built around you. Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, steady faith is stronger than destiny. Destiny is the result of causes most accidental and is therefore loosely woven. Confidence and good hope will overcome it easily. Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, if you want to know your true nature, you must have yourself in mind all the time until the secret of your being stands revealed. So guys, I'm going to end this talk and, go sit in stillness and silence. No, I'm joking. I think everybody can be complimented on their stillness and silence, Imagine somebody sings and people are like, incredible, I've never heard such beautiful sounds enter my ear. And imagine somebody is silent and the mystic is like, I have never heard such beautiful silence there. I think the resolution of intellectual contentment comes down to the permission to love without a condition. That means when you become an unconditional lover of the world event, of your consciousness, as if like, I've seen people pray at temples, worship statues of gods, like in Vedic and polytheistic traditions, for example, or people worship holy books and whatnot. But on some level, how many people worship their eyes beginning or being? Just the mystery, just like how we suddenly, just like you log into a multiplayer online game and your character is found in that game, right? Similarly, you have an account and the character is found. It's as if like we've already logged into the account and we're being a character. So it's like when we wake up in the day, we're logging back into poetically the game of manifestation. And when we deep sleep, it's as if consciousness logs out. It's tired of playing for the day. This is mysticism for the, video game realm. I think ultimately it comes down to this. We must trust our body, and then we can love it. We must trust our mind, and then we can love it. And when it comes to the soul, that means imagine somebody had like such a trust. They're like, man, this person has the biggest trust in the world. And people were like, what does he trust in? And where's his trust? And he says it's the unknown. Because once you trust the unknown, knowledge doesn't need to fear its destiny. And I guess this is strange because, it's as if like I poetically ran after spirituality only to realize we are not a spirit. The spirit is being. We are beings. We say we're human beings. That's the egoistic dimension of it, but that's the egoism. But it's like every person should honor their intelligence to have allowed the world to even be present. We're not just in the presence, of a species on a rock in the middle of nowhere. We are in the presence of a universal sector where an intelligent event has happened, and we are in the front lines of conscious manifestation. That means all the other species on our planet, they're still in the slumber, they're still dreaming in nature. We snapped out of the dream of the ecosystem defining us, and so we awaken to the dream of, an idea defining us. It's like at the moment we had names, we could be characters and stories that are identified. So anyways, guys, thanks for listening. I hope this episode was helpful. And remember, more than we have come here to meet others, we have also come into this world to meet ourselves for the first time. And when Srila Sakadad Maharaj was saying, like, for a moment, just sit down and be like, okay, is there a way where I can love and revere what I'm being? That's it. That's the end of psychological suffering. When we can unconditionally love our own being. The person's like, but the human being is suffering. Yeah, but it's also being, it's just, in that moment of being, there's a, hidden piece of, how all worlds are, present in a space. You know, the angels that were far, you know, they are poetically moving in our veins, you know. Sometimes when I have like moments where, you know, I go in my bed and I sleep and I try to, you know, envision myself healing. Like I try to, you know, poetically envision myself healing, and I envision like in every cell of my body, poetically, like every cell of my body, like having a guardian angel, and it's like these like cellular level angels assisting every cell in my body, right? These are visualizations, guys. I do this before I go to sleep. I try to think as if like, you know, imagine you go to sleep, and right before you sleep, the last thought you have is like, you know, this sunlight, you know, in your inner realms, this light from the inner realms, let's say this bright light is hitting you and it's healing you, and so you sleep. I'm not kidding. Tomorrow morning you'll wake up and being like, oh my God, am I healed? Like you're feeling, it's like the brain's going to play the last thought poetically. So anyways, guys, thanks for listening. I hope this episode was helpful. And at the same time, you know, the mind, you know what it is? It's like the false is an opportunity to discover truth again. And what truth is the activation of the full potential of an entity. Shall we see the greatest humanity? That's the idea. That means no longer even thinking of people as strong or weak, but seeing that it's good. Okay, everybody's a multidimensional being. There's multiple dimensions to their perception that is keeping them what is the most advanced state of the way their mind is holding itself or moving itself. That means, could we be brave enough creatures to wonder about our advancement? It's like find a way where peace was in the room before you were, let's say, missing it. Thanks for listening, guys. Much blessings and loves. And even if there is, again, a simulation or simulations, it's like go beyond. As Sarilad Maharaj said, whatever you come across, go beyond. You know. And if you hear these talks of mine and you want to go beyond, at least subscribe and then go beyond. Much blessings and namaste.